Hey there, it's me, Melissa Brunetti, the host of Mind Your Own Karma, the Adoption Chronicles. And if you have been listening to this podcast for any amount of time, you know part of my purpose is to educate the world on the complexities of adoption. And if you didn't know, yesterday, October 30th, was Adoptee Remembrance Day. This is the day that we remember those adoptees that have completed suicide over the trauma they have felt from being adopted. The statistics are pretty staggering. There was a 20-year-old study that showed that adolescent adoptees are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than non-adoptees. Males were 3.2 times increased risk, and females were 4.8 times increased risk for attempting suicide. And adult adoptees who searched for biological family are at even higher risk for psychological distress. If you feel you need immediate help, please call the Suicide and Crisis Hotline at 988. These are staggering and true statistics that need to be addressed. November is Adoptee Awareness Month, and if you have an adoptee or know an adoptee in your life, I ask you that you join us, the adoptee community, by educating yourselves on the complexities of adoption. You can do that by listening to one of many of the adoptee podcasts that are available. There are many books that are autobiographies that you could read, or even just Google adoption trauma. It's time to educate the world about these statistics. If you are struggling, it's never too late to reach out for help. Please, again, dial the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988.
Hey there, it's Melissa Brunetti, and welcome to the Mind Your Own Karma podcast.
Hey there, Karma Crew. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Mind Your Own Karma, the Adoption Chronicles. Today, I have an adoptee and author, Dr. Jack Rocco, on the show today. His book is called Recycled, and let me tell you, it's different than a lot of the other adoptee books that I have read. It has laughter, it has you crying, all the emotions in between. It is an absolutely fantastic book, and it doesn't just talk about adoption. There's so much more packed into this book, and I highly recommend it. But before we dive in, let me tell you a little bit more about Dr. Jack Rocco. He has had more than 30 years practicing as an orthopedic and cosmetic surgeon. His work has taken him to many countries and cultures, including to Japan, where he served in the U.S. Air Force, and to Madagascar, where he established and helped treat hundreds of children with devastating orthopedic deformities, predominantly including clubfoot. Recycled, his first book, chronicles the behind-the-scenes, reluctant and subconscious journey exploring the impact of being relinquished and adopted during the baby scoop era of the mid-60s. As he eventually finds his birth families, he also finds himself. He maintains homes outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, and Hartford, Connecticut. Jack is a pretty busy man being a surgeon, and he had to do this interview in the airport. So you may hear some background noise as he was generously squeezing in this interview into his busy schedule. Here is my interview with Jack Rocco. So we are welcoming Jack Rocco to the show. Hello there.
Hey, Melissa, how are you?
I'm great. So you wrote a book called Recycled, and it explains the complexities of adoption so well. I laughed, I cried, and every emotion in between reading the book. And I just loved it. And I'm just wondering why the name Recycled.
Well, that came from my grandfather. You know, I had the immigrant first generation, immigrant grandfather who came to this country, and he didn't talk so good, as they would say in Erie, Pennsylvania. So that was his word, and he used it more in terms of any kid in the family that wasn't traditional, like if it was a stepchild or girlfriend's previous previous relationship. So it was these kids that were, not your traditional husband-wife family situation. and I'd never heard the word. We were very close growing up, and I was probably in my late 20s when I first heard him use the word, and I describe it in the book. We were fixing a grandfather clock. He would make cabinets for grandfather clocks in his basement, and I helped him, and we were always together. And we were fixing a clock one day, and he's like, Jack, I think we got more recycled kids in the family now than we got our own. And I was like, yeah, I know, Papa, and I kind of I think I kind of did the typical, like, society's going to pot, it's not your usual, I think my reaction to it was, a little bit derogatory, perhaps. Just, I know the world's changing, it's not traditional. I'm like, I know, Papa, what are you gonna do? And that was it. But then I was familiar with the word. And I talk about in the book when he passed away, they put me in charge of writing his eulogy, which was a huge emotional thing for me. And when we were so close, I can't even tell you. And so I spent the day after he died just driving around my hometown of Erie and just going through all the memories of, went into his workshop and just looked around and found little things that he had worked on. Then went to the lake where we would fish. I went to the 84 lumber place where we go and get supplies, and just all these memories came flushing by. And then at some point, the idea of the recycled child came into my thoughts, and the kid, I had everybody include in their comments in the eulogy. And that was the first time, I was probably 32, 31, 32. And I thought, and I'm like, you know what? I was recycled as well. And like I was the original recycled kid.
Yeah.
The OG of recycled. And so it kind of shocked me that, I had assimilated. I think I had a great childhood growing up, and really loved them and loved the experience. So when when that struck me, I was just like, wow, it's like I kind of gave a little bit of a derogatory feeling or sense. I wasn't sure what he wanted me to say about that, because the word could be taken as somewhat derogatory. And then I thought about it. I'm like, you know what? I was recycled, and I never felt that way. And I don't think, all the kids, I had everybody write down on a piece of paper things that he had told them or taught them. And it was hysterical, and it was hysterical, and it was consistent. The thing that my father and uncle told about him, and my generation and the generation after me and the little kids, he was just universally, loved and appreciated. And no one took the term as derogatory. It was just, his way of getting it across.
Right. The Italian vocabulary, no filter.
Yeah. I absolutely
Totally get it.
Yeah.
So what do you know about your adoption, the circumstances around why you were put up for adoption?
Yeah, my parents were, it ended up being pretty much the classic story that a lot of people heard, that they were, young college kids. It was a brief relationship, whether that was one date, two dates, I don't know. I didn't really dig, some things are my business, some things weren't. But my mother pretty much commented that, it's a brief relationship, and she found out she was pregnant, and walked down Main Street of Mansfield, Pennsylvania, and he was practicing football on the field, and we walked this walk with her once I reunited with her. So it's kind of neat to be able to envision it happening, 40 years later. And she told him of the pregnancy, and I don't think getting married was an option. So, she did the typical, went away to a, home for wayward women. And which was in Erie, Pennsylvania. She probably lived about 4 hours away. So, she went away to visit an aunt, had me, gave me away, relinquished me, and then went back home. And it was her senior year, so her career was a little sidetracked, and she ended up going to grad school afterwards, and just eventually got married, but never had any other children.
Oh, okay. So you're her only child.
Yeah.
Wow. So why did your adoptive parents want to adopt? Do you know?
Why did they choose to adopt?
Yeah.
My mother had endometriosis, so she was unable to conceive, which, in an Italian family with kids crawling all over the floor everywhere, that was, I'm sure a huge disappointment for them. Yeah. And, I know there's a range of feelings on, adoptive parents, and I never had the sense that there was anything wrong with what they did. It was common for the day, and it's what they did. And, me and my sister were integrated in the family very well. I think we both, quote unquote, looked Italian. Got a little darker eyes, darker hair, a little darker complexion. Excuse me, catching some Northeast crud up here, I think. But, I have, in retrospect, of course I did have, feelings of adoption and feelings of curiosity, but, we were told right along, you were loved. And I remember my mother sitting on the bed next to me, putting me to sleep as a child, and, just telling me how much she loved me and how much they went through to get me and how they appreciate, all those things. So, I was on board with it, and I think it was true. I
did you ever remember being told you were adopted, or did you always know?
I don't. Yeah, I kind of always knew. And I remember, if anything, I remember being the one who told my other cousins. Okay. We had 11 cousins in my generation, including me. And I remember sitting underneath dining room tables, or, in the backyard, and telling people I was adopted. And I was the oldest boy. And we all got along. And I also had an uncle who was adopted, maybe, 2 decades before or more. And I was very close with him as well. So there was no stigma, there was no teasing that I recall. I assimilated. I was, in retrospect, I call probably a hyper assimilator. I was more, quote unquote, more Italian than most Italians, I guess. I had the Italian horn and the red, white, and green flag t-shirts, and, kiss me, I'm Italian. And, but we were completely surrounded by it. And in Erie, that was common. So I loved it. I really did.
Yeah, I had the same. And I don't know about you, but in my Italian adoptive family, it's almost like it never crosses their mind. Like, it's like you're part of the family and that's it. Like, it doesn't, I don't know. I've never felt different. Did you ever feel different?
Like I said, subconsciously, I recall, looking at other kids. I had really poofy hair, Brillo pad head, and was teased about that a little bit. And, I also, like in retrospect, especially during my teen years, I had bad dandruff. My scalp was always itchy, and I would just, I had the Seltz blue and the Head and Shoulders, and trying to get rid of my dandruff. And it just, was really irritated scalp. And then in retrospect, I had a different type of hair that needed more moisturizer and oil versus I could wash it all day long. I was just making it worse. So some of those things that, because it turns out that I was mixed race, that I'm not Italian. And it wasn't until coming out of the fog when, I say in the book, it's like when the dam burst, when I found my birth mother, and when she relinquished me in court. I had the court transcripts, and the judge asked her, are you Joyce? Yes, sir. Are you the mother of this Negro child? The transcript. And I was like, who's the neat? It's like, it was shocking.
You're looking around.
Yeah, who's the neat? Who? Who's he talking about? Did she have another baby? Like, what? So then I was like, no wonder I had the hair. No wonder I had the dandruff. I just kept washing. No wonder I had, like, my friends would say I had a bubble butt, or, I
Yeah.
had some, like all the stereotypes. And
Right.
my school was a diverse school, high school, middle school. I had close friends. I played sports. I ran track and played football. Um, so I got along great with them. I didn't have any points of contention. And, this is soon after a lot of the civil rights movement and race riots and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but, it was just, the African American culture was just as much of my upbringing through my friends. Um, and I never, in retrospect, I probably got along with them better than some of my other friends,
Mm.
which I found interesting. I was like,
Yeah.
there was a natural flow and rhythm and vibe and something that,
Yeah.
I
And
seemed to be
ease.
able to understand better.
So even though you had a self-proclaimed great adoptive family, you still had some struggles. And you said in the book, I can't ignore the fact that there were significant negative effects on my life as a result of my abandonment. What were those negative effects?
Yeah, I think, the way I kind of try to describe it in the book, is by, I wrote the book for me. Like I was journaling, I was going through a separation, and I had a girlfriend from high school that she would always say, no matter where you are or who you're with, you'll always blend with them. Like you'll change your personality to
Mm.
blend with them. And I
Mm.
was like, you're crazy. I don't do that. And then she's like, yeah, you do. I'm like, well, everybody does that a little bit. I mean, I'm not gonna,
Yeah.
just gonna listen to someone's opinion. I'm not. She's like, not like you. You're different. So she sensed that,
Wow.
hyper assimilator, if you will. And I thought she was crazy, and we still are good friends today. And she's helped me through the book and through some of the discoveries. And it's interesting that, she saw more of it than I did, even at the time.
Yeah.
But, I think in my mind, it's awful hard to, self psychoanalyze,
Mm-hmm.
but, um, I always did, quote unquote, the good thing. I was a people pleaser. I think I associated with people that my family would have associated with. I dated girls that my family would approve of, you know, um, that I kind of self selected their preferences for me,
Yes. Yeah.
you know, and I mentioned in the book, that there were African American women that I dated in residency, and it felt completely normal. It felt completely, we got along great. But then when push came to shove, and there was a orthopedic department dinner at some fancy place
Mhm.
or whatever, I'd find a date that wasn't necessary, that to
Yeah.
bring it just I felt the awkwardness of it, and I couldn't explain it. That division between my preferences and other
Yeah.
people's preferences. And
Interesting.
I do think it was palpable, once again, in retrospect,
Mm-hmm.
that I do think there is inner subconscious workings that identify your kind, your
Yeah.
tribe
Mm-hmm.
to you.
Definitely.
And you sense the things that are similar, you sense the things that are different. And then there's those social pressures, there's your natural, your natural preferences, and then your social preferences. And I was heavily dominated by my social pressures.
Yeah.
I complied. I was a quote unquote good kid. I did everything I was told. I went to, you got to find yourself a nice Italian girl, a nice girl, a nice, and I'm sure we all have that to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But to me, that was, a really huge regret, if you will, that, there were plenty of people that I got along with, and had good relationships with, but the social pressures kept me from ever kicking it up a notch.
Right.
That I went back to, oh, my parents like her, she gets along with my grandparents. She just, those kinds of things, but it was always a push-pull for me.
Yeah, definitely.
Even though like culturally and academically and socially, like what I put into the nurture category, from a standpoint of nurture, that's all I had was my nurture. I didn't
Right.
have natural jack, if you will, that I, was off balance in the nature nurture department, heavily in favor of nurture and what I was taught and what I was expected to do under these constraints.
Yep.
But then I felt this pull, this whatever, even me going to college, me doing the traveling, and I left home and always loved my home. We would always go home, but I was always looking for more.
Mm,
During the service, I went to Japan. I was, everything was was an exciting life in a lot of ways, but it was an unfulfilling life, I would say, in a lot of respects. Not completely,
right.
but to an extent.
Right.
And
And it seemed like you excelled in everything you try to do, like school, and like you were good at sports and everything that kind of they were expecting. You excelled in all those areas. So in a way, you kind of feel like, oh, well, I must be going in the right direction because these things are all kind of working for me. But at the same time, internally, you're like something's off.
yeah, and like I said, relationships were always a struggle for me. It's like I would start dating someone and I'm like, she's nice. I like, I really had a commitment issue. I had a, I think it was somewhat of a cognitive dissonance between what I was looking for and what I thought I was looking for and what I was finding. And, so I think, even with my marriage and subsequent divorce and I mean, I look back at that as a huge failure on my part. I look back at that as a huge embarrassment, a huge, I mean, in a lot of ways, I had the perfect life. And I mean, I guess if anything, some of the comments on the book or, someone wrote, and they defended me. They said some might look at this and say he's into himself. He's, you know, whatever, narcissist. I'm bragging about my accomplishments, if you will. But I think it was more, I picked the stories that I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to portray it as, despite the fact that everything was so great, that the family was great, that and I think it's one of like the bigger you are, the bigger they are, the harder they fall.
Yeah.
All these successes and all this wonderful stuff, and then when my wife actually initiated the search for my birth mother, I wasn't interested. I had an event when I was 31. I was in residency and I had a blind date, and she was also adopted. And she was the one who first started blowing away the fog.
Yeah.
And she's like, you need to read Betty Jean Lifton, Journey to Adopted Self. And I freaking hate that book. That book just knocked me into a funk that I'd never experienced. And then I buried it again. I voluntarily went back in the fog. And during that time, I tried to find my mother, and then there was a false alarm.
Oh,
So that when
God.
my ex-wife wanted to initiate it, we were recently married, and she was pregnant soon after the marriage.
Mhm.
And she did the right thing as a mom, and she's like, don't you want to find your birth mother? And I'm like, no, because it was horrible for me the first time. I just was, I said, I'm too busy to do this stuff. I don't have time for all this emotion.
Right.
And so she's like, well, don't you want to find your medical history? I'm like, no, I'm healthy. I'm 32 years old. No, I was probably 40 at the time. 40 years old. I'm healthy. I don't have anything. And what about the kids? Like, no, 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 no. And then eventually she was like, well, what if I get the paperwork? This went over. Get the paperwork and fill it out. Will you sign it? So I'm like, sure, whatever. And I didn't think it was going to work. I didn't think that they would find her. I didn't, I was just trying to keep the peace. But, when it did happen, once again, I stayed in the fog. I stayed in oh, this is great. This is wonderful. Just, couldn't have been it, but it just started the process.
So what happened? How'd you find her? She fill out the paperwork and
yeah, I filled out the paperwork. My daughter was born. My daughter was a little over 2 years old. And then the state called me and they said, we got your paperwork. We were going to look into it. And I'm like, oh, geez, it took you almost 3 years. You're not working too hard over there at the, and I said, I was not aware of, the difficulties that many people have and getting your original birth certificate. I was content. So when they called, same thing. I was like, really? So they, she called me and then I was like, okay. She's like, we're going to look into it, and literally 3 days later, she said, okay, we found your mother. Here's her name, her address, her email, her phone number. She says, call her. She doesn't have a problem. She sounds nice. And then the woman was like, woman on the phone, she's like, oh, and it seems like at least one of your parents was African-American. And, that was a huge thing to find out on the phone,
right?
Just like drop that bomb. But, but at the time, like I said, despite not knowing, it was like I knew.
I was going to say, yeah.
Like I knew this was
it
coming.
Didn't surprise you.
Like, no shit. I knew this was going to happen. I knew that's what they were going to say. Totally believable. I didn't doubt it or anything. So, once again, that put me in the, my nature knew, even though my nurture was layers of concrete and whatever rebar, like this thick nurtured shell over top of my natural self that was sometimes a light veil and sometimes a heavy, armor around it. But it was there. It was in me. I knew, quote unquote, knew the truth that, and Nancy Verrier's book, The Primal Wound, I mean, it's so many adoptees when they read that are like, oh, yes. And it totally makes sense. And I think we totally carried that with us as well. And once again, it's buried, it's laid under a facade so that even though you feel it, you sense it. There's a mourning, there's a sadness, there's a loss. But you can't describe it. You're like, what is that?
Yeah.
And then when you hear of this primal wound, you're like, absolutely. And you talk to other people and they're like, come on, you're a baby. How do you know that?
Right. Yeah.
Like, I don't know how I know it, but
yeah,
similar animals have very impressive skills. And, monarch butterfly, they leave El Capistrano and start going north. And it's 4 or 5 or 6 butterflies later that know to go back to El Capistrano.
Yeah.
How do they know? They're
right.
freaking butterflies.
Yep.
And if a butterfly with its small brain and primordial instincts can figure that out, come on, don't tell me that we don't have those as well.
Well, that's the whole social narrative that's been put out, by the adoption industry, and everybody's bought into it. So that's why we have to start educating the world on what we're talking about right now. But
absolutely.
Yeah. So your family joked about finding you under a rock, and I had to laugh because that's just so Italian, something an Italian would say. But you talk about your feelings, and you said that you felt like you didn't have a birthday.
Right.
What did you mean about that?
Well, it's everyone had a birthday. Everyone has a birthday, but it wasn't until I had my kids, and chapter 6 is the start of part 2 entitled Nature. So chapter 6, I get married, start my family, have my child, meet my mother, all those things. And, and I try to be funny, and I don't know if I succeed or not, but I talk about the whole trip to the hospital, and it's, you know, all its little quirkinesses. And I mean, that's our little thing. It's like daddy didn't want to go to the hospital. He didn't think I was ready to deliver. And I don't know if it was subconscious or whatever, but I didn't want to be in the hospital too long. I spent enough time in the hospital, and I could deliver a baby if I had to, so maybe I was a little slower or just, but then, when my daughter was born, suddenly all that hesitation, all that buildup, all those, funny things that I did, that my wife did, that, all the things that happened on the birthday before she was born, me stopping at a convenience store to get a coffee, and, just those are all a part of her birthday. And back, I mean, we say that, I have a friend, his last, he's an orthopedic surgeon. His last name is Wong. And my daughter was conceived at the Wong wedding, got married. And so we always joke about that. It's like, you were conceived at the Wong wedding, hun. And she's like, Daddy, I'm sick of that story, but it's those things that, we know approximately when she was conceived. We know, there's the buildup. We know when we met. We know, she knows, stories about me dating back to my childhood, and stories of her mother dating back to her childhood, which connects my daughter to us.
Yeah.
Not just the birthday, but all those things before. And when you think about it, all those thousands of years before, through evolution, through this family, that family, your family tree, you have a connection to your past.
Yeah.
Whereas adoptees, for me, and I describe it as my got day, and it's like my mother would say, I remember the day we got you. And I loved hearing that story, and it was great, and tell it again, mommy, but then I think about it, it's just like, but I didn't have a birthday. I don't know what happened on my birthday. And I don't know how Larry and Joyce met. I don't know what kind of relationship they had. I didn't know about her family. I didn't know about his family. All those roots that tie you to something, that intimately tie you to something, good or bad, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Good
And
or
not only that, but it's like the day that you were born is probably, it wasn't a happy celebrated day. It was a sad day for your birth mother and for everybody. There wasn't relatives waiting there to hold you and nurture you and, give you all the things that you needed. That's not what happened on that day, most likely, so it's all that wrapped up into one. And I always feel like I got dropped off by the stork or something, like I never had a birth. You don't hear that story. And then when I finally met my birth mother and she told me the story, I remember asking her, but I can't remember the story. And it meant so much to me to know, but I don't remember it. It was almost like too much to remember.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, but then the story of the rock, it's funny to me that I can envision that rock. Like I could draw, I mean, if I was a good artist, I could draw a picture of that rock where my parents found me. Like in my memory, it's a false memory, but they told me the story that they found me under a rock. And I can picture the rock. And like I said in the book, the rock is in a desert. And I don't know if that's symbolic or whatever, but it's just a wide open desert with nothing around it and an isolated rock that I was sitting under.
Wow.
And I also think that I have memories of being in a crib in the orphanage. Once again, are these false memories? Are they real memories? Are they but that became a part of my history, these false memories. Like in my brain, like my brain doesn't know, I was a neuroscience major, and I try to think at that level, what is this primordial new infant brain doing at that time? It's just been it's been bonding with the mother inside the womb and hearing her voice and seeing visions through the abdominal wall, feeling the heartbeat, the electric, the vibe, the chemistry, just so the smells, the tastes that are you, that's your dirt, it's your soil. and suddenly you're born and it's like, boom, under the heat lamp, into the nursery, into the orphanage, this nurse, that nurse, this caretaker, that caretaker. You're just like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
And the brain at that point is extremely malleable and extremely, like, the learning that takes place in the first 2 years, we can't compare to that nowadays, as an adult. So that's a very influential period. And, all those inner, initial learning things.
Yeah.
And I could picture myself, being a kiss ass to the nurses and trying to, smile, or I don't know what, cuddle, just trying to get some attention, like all the other kids were trying to do in the orphanage. And that becomes your first, compensatory reaction to your environment. That, okay, all right, this is getting me food, this is getting me held a little longer, this is the trial and error situation.
Did you think about any of that when you had your daughter?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And then we also did a number of trips we went to Madagascar on a mission trip where we were in orphanages with 300 orphans. And I mean, it was just painful for me to see this and to realize that, what's separating me from them, really. I'm here to help them and fix their feet and, their hips, and, just that they're looking at me and I'm looking at them like, I want to know more about you guys. What's going on with you?
Yeah.
And it was just too close for comfort to really, to see that. And then, and I think we did the trips after I'd found my birth mother. So I was creeping out of the fog and, trying to come to terms. And I put Betty Jean Lifton's book down and never wanted to look at it again after I read it the first time, but of course I always kept it with me. I always knew where it was. I still have it now, but
yeah.
Refused to look at it because it just disrupted me so much from this ideal.
So when you met your birth mother, is that when that shell started cracking and you started coming out of the fog at that point? Or
I would say probably not. I think I still tried to bury it in there. We reunited and it was fine. It was perfect. Not a lot of pressure. We found it out. And we were writing back and forth these long emails and long conversations. And it was just like, my compatriot. I felt the bond. And then it was Mother's Day where she sent me an email and she's like, hey, from your other mother. And I was like, the heels dug in. It just got too real.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I have a mother. I love my mother. We can't see each other anymore, kind of thing. It was me that really put the brakes on and, turned tail and ran.
Yeah. Wow.
And, so it, and I said, I went back into the fog for another 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And, during that period, it was constantly on my mind. It was constantly, the marriage wasn't going well. It just was, communication was horrible. And I'm like, it just, this isn't my life. This isn't my life.
Yeah.
It's a great life. It's a fantastic life. I don't know what is wrong with me. What is wrong with me? And it was always in my head. And I was, we lived in an old farm. We had 100+ acres and I'm brush hogging the field and being Farmer Jack and thinking just like, who am I? And all these things. So then eventually the marriage, we separated and she went north to Rhode Island back home and I went south to a job in North Carolina. So it was a complete dramatic, and it's like, I didn't hate her. I didn't, I didn't have, it just wasn't whatever. And
wasn't what you wanted. Yeah.
so then I ended up down in North Carolina and thinking, and then I decided that I need to find my father's side of the story. And I think that was the real, met the family, found out about him, you know, recognized the similarities between me and that family, between me and my mother. And it's like, I think that's when the fog finally cleared. And it was during that period where I was journaling and writing the book and really trying to figure it out. So a lot of the chapters are just me trying to relive my life as I lived it, and then I didn't know how the book was going to end. I didn't know what my feelings were going to be. I didn't know if I was going to be angry. I didn't know, a lot of it was written after chapter 10, which is the climax of the book where all the stuff hits the fan and,
Yeah.
my family admits what they knew, what they didn't know.
Yeah,
that
let's talk about that. So there was a part where you go to tell your adoptive parents that you found your biological family. And the way you describe it in the book is every adoptee's nightmare, I think, how it all went down. But they had been keeping a secret from you as well. So tell us what happened.
Yeah, like I've been going through this and I did confide with my sister about it. And we were on the same page of like, we don't want to hurt mom and dad's feelings, we don't want to, but I'm telling like at least in the nuns had been lying to them all along, and I found out this stuff. And my blind date said that the nuns lied to her parents. So I was going under that assumption. So, I'm like, Lise, this is kind of funny. I mean, it's like, it's just no kidding. The nuns lied. Of course they did. They want everything to be rosy, So I'm telling my sister, and she's like, I don't think you should tell them, Jack. And I'm like, I'll be fine, Lise. And I tie that, I try to be creative, I guess, in my writing. And I talk about early in the book about a wasp nest where I'm going into the nest and my sister's like, don't do it. Don't do it. And the wasp nest is really an analogy for me going into the birth history,
Yeah.
So we're sitting outside and, I go inside to get another bottle of wine because I needed my liquid courage to have this conversation.
Sure.
And she comes in, she's like, you're not doing this, are you? And I'm like, yeah, Lisa, it's going to be fine. We need this. It's fine. We're grown-ups. It's no big deal, blah, blah, blah. So I go out and it comes out and I'm like, I Carrie Ann filled out the forms and I found my birth mother and my mother's like, oh, Jack, just complete disappointment. And I'm like, no, really, it's good. It's like, wait, I'm not done, So I try to tell the story and everyone's bawling, everyone's crying. My father's sobbing, red face, just ridiculous, And I'm like, what is the problem? I didn't say anything. I just said that I found them and they were college kids, this and that. And then, through his sobs, he's like, Jack, we already knew that. And 5 people went to their graves with that secret. And I'm like, what secret? I didn't tell you a secret. There's no secrets that I revealed yet. And, then I'm like, and then he's like, well, we had to tell everyone in the family before we even brought you home. I'm like, what? And then I'm like, that my father was black? And he's like, yeah. And I was just like, you're kidding me. Like, I've been like 50 years with these feelings, with these thoughts, 15 years of searching. And after hearing the Negro child comment and all these realizations that I'm like, no kidding. I mean, I should have known, I should have guessed, I should have figured it out, putting all the blame on me. And it's like, and the nuns, these poor nuns, or my poor parents with these nuns lying to them.
And they knew.
So like, yeah, we knew. Everyone knew. Everyone in the family knew. And I'm like, it's like the Truman Show. It was painful.
Yeah. So how did that play out between the relationship with you and your adoptive parents after that?
We did the usual Italian thing. We put our heads back in the sand and just, my mother called me 2 days after that event and said, your father wants everything to go back to the way it was. So that's what we did.
Yeah.
And, so then I wrote the book. I put the book on my laptop. I showed it to my sister, my kids, cousins. And I was fine with it there on my laptop. But then when Roe v. Wade was overturned and, all these talking heads about adoption, and just after having gone through this, like I said, despite the perfect quote unquote perfect upbringing, despite the social successes and the academic and the military and all these things that were so good, I was still pretty messed up over it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, and I was the lucky one. You also hear these stories of foster homes and abuse and drug abuse, and I'm like, no, this is no joke. Adoption is heavy. It is long-term damaging.
Mm.
I mean, there are good things that come out of the trauma. Like in war, times of war, you'll hear these great stories of people bonding together, but it's still freaking war.
Yeah.
And yeah, there were good things, but, and I'm not saying that it would have been better with my, it's like, we all know that it's not better work, it's different.
Yeah.
But it would have been hugely different. Who would I have been? And I refer to that infant that was initially born, I refer to that as my vanishing twin. Like, what would that guy have ended up as?
Yeah.
Would
It's a great
have,
analogy. Yeah.
who would he have been? And where would he have gone? And like this me that I have now is just an actor. It's a response. It's a
Survival
reflex
response.
to the
Yeah.
trauma. It's a survival, and he ran his ass off, and he always worked hard and always, but he never felt comfortable just sitting still and just being him.
Yeah.
And it's better if I think of it as someone else rather than me.
Yeah, definitely. Now you split the book up into parts, the nature, nurture, and free will. What was the purpose of doing that?
I guess a lot of it was just some of my interests, and why was I interested? I don't know, but I've really gravitated to a lot of behavioral neuroscientists, if you will. Robert Wright was one of the first books that I read. The whole field of, that genetics doesn't just give you your eye color, your cheekbones. It gives you your personality and your cultural tendencies, your stereotypes, whatever they are. Those are just as genetically passed on as anything else. A Chihuahua acts like a Chihuahua. A German Shepherd acts like a German Shepherd. You don't see any Chihuahuas walking around with German Shepherd swagger. They have a personality and an appearance, and they go hand in hand with their needs.
Yeah.
That those, like, nature and nurture are not enemies. Everyone says nature versus nurture. I think I did a lecture recently, or presentation, and I talked about that they're more like frenemies, or each other's nemesis.
Yeah.
Nature and nurture need each other. They work together. They're simpatico. They need each other. Your appearance and your personality complement each other, and that to me is authentic.
Yeah.
It's like this Chihuahua looks like a Chihuahua, acts like a Chihuahua. He's a Chihuahua. He's an authentic Chihuahua. You see some Chihuahua walking around like a German Shepherd, you're like, that dude's faking it. He's not he's trying to compensate. He's got Napoleon syndrome.
True. Now, where does free will come into this?
I think, I eventually talk about free will as that control system, if you will. You need your nature, you need your nurture, and it's always a meandering path. And I liken free will to the yin and yang symbol, that invisible line that is between the light and the dark, the good and the bad, the nurture and the nature, and I try to define what I see as nature and what I see as nurture, and it can be interpreted different ways. Some are blends, but I try to give examples of what I think is nature, what I think is nurture. And I think the free will, knowing your nature, knowing your nurture, the free will decides. And early in the book, I some of the stories may not make sense as to why I included them in an adoption story, but I did think that they were all related. Like early in the book, I talk about a night I was on call, And I was dead tired. I was beat. I just wanted to sleep. I wanted to poop. I wanted to eat. I don't know what I wanted to do, but I was tired physically. My nature was screaming, you need sleep, you need whatever. And then I walk in the emergency room and I see this trauma patient with both of his legs broken, bone sticking out of the skin. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't deal with this now. I'm too tired. I'm stressed. I smell. I gotta sleep. But then I start going into my nurturing. I start thinking about, okay, what do we need to do? You know, my nature wants to go to sleep and say, screw this, I'm leaving, I'm running away to home. But then my nurture kicks in. Okay, what do I got to do? I got to check his pulses. I got to get the equipment in the OR. I got to call X-ray. I got to, I'm going into my training.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the point where, my nature and my nurture are in highly conflicting situations. I had to do it. I had to fix the guy. But then as I'm walking and I see him and I'm like, I'm evaluating everything and I get to his head and they have the breathing tube pulled out. And I'm like, what's going on? And it's like, oh, he's dead. And I'm like, yes, my nature jumped out and says, yes, I'm going to sleep. And then I'm like, wait a minute. I just celebrated the death of someone, but I got to sleep. It's like in those moments. And I call that my superhuman moment, my Superman moment. Not that I did anything tremendous. I looked horrible. The optics of it were horrible, but it's when that nature and nurture were absolutely butting against each other.
Yeah.
Whether that be in time of war and you do something that is harmful, something that is selfish, something that is embarrassing in a time of war. And I think a lot of war veterans come home and they battle with those moments when your nature and your nurture, you're like, you had to survive. You just had to survive. You have to sleep, you have to poop, you have to do the basic things that you need to do. And sometimes your nurture doesn't allow you and you don't look so good in those moments. So, I guess I put that free will as those choices you make. Sometimes make you look good on the nurture side. Some make you look bad because you choose yourself and your selfish things. And I think, everyone in the triad goes through those moments.
Yeah.
Birth parents are like, yeah, we got pregnant. What are we going to do? Let's give it away and run away, And then the adoptive parents are like, well, we can't have our own kids. What do we do? Well, we take a kid and we pretend that he's ours. And you know what I mean? It's those moments that you don't always look so good being super.
Right.
It's not the Superman thing. Like, the superhuman means that you were placed in a situation that had so much force, so much stress in opposing directions. And you kind of chose you because you had to survive. You had to get back to school. You had to give the baby away because it was,
Yeah.
it just I try to make that connection between those powerful forces. And I try to do it in a creative way by telling stories as opposed to lecturing to people, because I'm not an expert on any of it other than I've lived it. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not an adoption counselor. But I think within all of our stories, we have those, if you look for them, you got those moments that are just heart-wrenching. And I think just being able to subdivide them into your natural self that needs to survive and your nurtured self, which needs to get along. And sometimes you make good decisions, sometimes you make bad decisions, but each had a purpose and a pull that you have to forgive yourself over. I mean, it's just, you can't second guess. You can't play Monday morning quarterback. You got to take it as I did what I had to do at the time I had to do it to just get through the next day.
Yeah. I know for me, like when you were explaining the yin and the yang with the nature nurture and that line in the middle is free will, I was thinking I didn't have that line in the middle. I didn't feel like I had that line in the middle separating those two. And so how messy does that get when there's no separation? But that separation of free will is actually my authentic self. So I'm taking a little bit from each, each side. And then there's me, the actual me is that line in the middle,
Right. You're the one making the decisions, but it needs to be an informed decision in order to achieve this perfect utopian human existence, this balanced nirvana in your life. You need ultimate and infinite knowledge of both yourself, and no one has that. You
Yeah.
go with what you have. And unfortunately, we don't have half of that. So our meandering line is, do I have ricotta cheese in my gnocchi, or do I make them with, it's all in the nurture side of things.
Right. And you also said in your book that writing it was your therapy. Your 55-year-old struggle to figure yourself out. What did you learn about yourself from writing the book?
A ton. I've learned that, I was inauthentic a good part of it. And that's a little painful.
Yeah.
I made decisions for other people instead of me. Um, I benefited from it. So maybe it was good for me to live for others and to be a successful contributing member of society. I put F-16 pilots back into the cockpit. I took people who couldn't walk and I allowed them to walk. You know what I mean? Like, I'm very proud of my career and the things I've done. But I'm horribly embarrassed by, the falling apart of my marriage and that family life that I grew up with so close, but now I don't have it. I'm here by myself, traveling in the airport, talking to you about who I am. And I'm 57 and I want to go back to 20, 15, 32. I want to go back somewhere with the knowledge I have now.
Yeah.
Because now it's a little late.
Well, now there's that compassion that you were just talking about. You got to have some compassion for yourself.
Oh, I know, but I'm just saying, like, those are the battling.
Yes.
And you're right. That and like I said, I had it good. I am in a good situation, but it still is not easy. And I'm not complaining about it.
Yeah.
I accept the challenge. I'm eager to improve and to move forward. But come on, man, just take the ball and chain off a little earlier
Come
for
on,
me.
man.
Give me a come on, man, give me a chance. Give a brother a chance. And I mean, I think, like I said, when I talk to I'm like, I get why you did it, but do you understand the effect that it had? And I think they do. I mean, I'm actually contemplating the sequel. I think, just me explaining them, me coming out to my parents and telling them that I wrote the book. Oh my God. The ulcer
Yeah.
stomach over that. Like, I wrote the book. And I'm not going to tell you how it works because I want to work
Dang
that a
it.
little better. I want to work that in my brain a little bit because it was powerful in
Was
so
it?
many ways, and it has been a good thing. It's been a necessary
Good.
thing. Like, I told my sister, we'll be fine. We need to do this. And at the time it didn't work out fine. It wasn't good. But I think with a couple more years and some more tears and hardships, it has become better.
That's good.
So
Good. So I always like to close and ask, what advice do you have for struggling adoptees?
yeah, I would say, I'm not the best at this. It's like, take it easy on yourself. You know, the sins you've committed, quote unquote sins, the bad decisions you've made in your life, the struggles you've had in your life are not uncommon. And anyone in the same situation, given the same circumstances, being adopted by the same family, with the same personality, would have done the same thing that you did. Even if there's things that are embarrassing to you, even if there's things that are hurtful to you. And then also just listen to that inner voice. Like I said, that instinct voice that brings those butterflies back. You have that.
Yeah.
But just listen to it. Be you as best you can. And you're going to fall and you're going to fail and you're going to make mistakes. But it's not a mistake. It's a correction. You're like, oh, that's not the person I need to hang out with. That's not the job I need. And unfortunately, we do this back and forth much more than most.
Yeah.
Our trial and error has no roadmap. but listen to it. When you find success, go with it. Don't punish yourself more by not going with your feelings. If there's someone that makes you feel good, if there's someone that makes you feel whole, if there's someone you vibe with, you communicate with, go with it.
Yeah.
It's for you. And you're the only one who's going to wake up with you tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. You're the only one who's with you through every chapter, every page, every word of the book. You're with you. So take care of you.
Yeah.
I think that's what you need to do.
Right. So where can we find your book? Tell us.
Amazon or Barnes and Nobles. Unfortunately, I should have a website and I should have a lot of things, but I have a website on Ingenium Books. I was very blessed to have them. They were a great publisher and they promoted the book, and we got listed on the Wall Street Journal, #1 bestseller for a week. So it was, the book was, so on their website, ingeniumbooks.com. I have a website, I have a page there, and he said you can buy the book on Barnes and Nobles or Amazon. And it's not a fact-based book. It's trying to be a parable in a way, using certain stories to kind of exemplify the experience so that hopefully people can live it. Maybe it's better for someone who isn't adopted so they can just live it. And I try to set it up and then surprise them with things. It's like, oh, it's so great. Oh shit, what happened there? And it just I didn't see that one coming, because that's how it happened to me. It was just like, whoa.
Yeah. Well, what I liked about it was like I said, it had all the emotions in it, but you find so many adoptee books that are just so serious, and it's like, it was nice to laugh at some of the things, I mean, It might piss some people off that I'm laughing about it, but it was pretty funny. A lot of that spots. And it's just like, you got to laugh at some of this, stuff that doesn't feel so good. So
I know. And yeah, that does help, whistling through the graveyard and whatever.
Well, thanks so much for coming on today, Jack.
I appreciate it. Great to meet you and feel your personality and your intelligence. I love it. So thank you.
You're welcome. Another amazing adoption story told today. And I just can't help but think of all of the parallel things that he said that I could relate to so easily, especially where he talks about, I have everything. Why am I not happy? I think so many adoptees can relate to that sentiment. And most of the time, we don't know why, because of the narrative that is out there that doesn't allow us to have our feelings surrounding being adopted. And I'm just so glad that the community is opening up now and that we're telling our stories and that we're educating the world. Make sure you get Jack's book. The link is in the show notes. Even if you are not an adoptee, it is such a great read. And if you are thinking of telling your story on the podcast, do not be shy. Send me an email at mindyourownkarma@gmail.com. Find me on my website, mindyourownkarma.com. Socials, Facebook, Instagram, you can DM me there. Let's get your story on the podcast. It's time for you to do your part in educating the world about adoption. As always, take what you need and leave what you don't. And always remember to mind your own karma. I'll see you next time.